You have declared a jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
The U.S. government has committed acts that are extremely unjust, hideous, and criminal through its support of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And we believe the U.S. is directly responsible for those killed in Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq. Due to its subordination to the Jews, the arrogance of the United States regime has reached the point that they occupied Arabia, the holiest place of the Muslims, who are more than 1 billion people in the world today. For this and other acts of aggression and injustice, we have declared jihad against the U.S.
Is the jihad directed against the U.S. government or United States troops in Arabia? What about U.S. civilians in Arabia or the people of the United States?
We have focused our declaration of jihad on striking at the U.S. soldiers inside Arabia, the country of the two holy places, Mecca and Medina. In our religion, it is not permissible for any non-Muslim to stay in Arabia. Therefore, even though American civilians are not targeted in our plan, they must leave. We do not guarantee their safety.
Osama bin Laden was the founder and leader of the militant Islamist group al-Qaeda, responsible for orchestrating some of the most devastating terrorist attacks in history. Bin Laden is most infamous for overseeing the 9/11 attacks on the U.S., where nearly 3,000 people were killed. His global jihadist movement carried out multiple other attacks, including the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings in East Africa and the 2000 bombing of the USS Cole. He became the face of terrorism worldwide, evading capture for nearly a decade before being killed by U.S. Navy SEALs in Pakistan in 2011. Bin Laden's actions and ideology have left a lasting legacy of extremist violence. Osama bin Laden was one of over 50 children born to Mohammed bin Laden, a self-made billionaire who immigrated to Saudi Arabia from Yemen as a laborer and eventually became the head of large construction projects for the Saudi royal family. Osama bin Laden's mother, Hamida al-Attas, was the 10th wife of Mohammed bin Laden. They divorced shortly after Osama's birth, and Mohammed introduced Hamida to his associate, Mohammed al-Attas. She married al-Attas in the late 1950s or early 1960s, and they had 4 children together. Bin Laden grew up in this new household with his 3 half-brothers and 1 half-sister. Despite having access to a life of luxury due to his family's significant wealth, Osama was drawn to religion and traditional values early on. His father died in an airplane crash when Osama was only 10 years old. By then, the bin Laden family's construction firm had become one of the largest in the Middle East, and they had developed close ties with the Saudi royal family. The family business earned over an estimated $5 billion, and Osama inherited an estimated $25 to $30 million from this fortune. Bin Laden attended the prestigious Al-Thagr Model School in Jeddah, where his formal education began. He then continued his studies at King Abdulaziz University, also in Jeddah, where he pursued a degree in economics and business administration. While at university, his interest in religion deepened, and he became more involved in political Islam, influenced by professors who promoted radical Islamic teachings. It is believed that Osama bin Laden received religious instruction from Muhammad Qutb, the brother of Islamic revivalist Sayyid Qutb, and from militant leader Abdullah Azzam. His time at university played a crucial role in shaping his future leadership of al-Qaeda, as it not only influenced his radical beliefs, but also equipped him with the skills to promote and expand the group. Bin Laden's political views revolved around the rejection of Western influence and the establishment of an Islamic state governed by Sharia law. The concept of jihad, or holy struggle, particularly resonated with him. He believed that Muslims had a duty to wage jihad against corrupt regimes and foreign powers that, in his view, were oppressing the Islamic world. His radicalization was also fueled by the political climate in the Middle East at the time, especially the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, which he saw as an assault on Islam. After leaving college in 1979, bin Laden began traveling to meet Afghan resistance leaders and raise funds for their cause. By 1984, his efforts were primarily focused in Afghanistan and Pakistan, where he worked with Abdullah Azzam to recruit and organize Arab volunteers to join the fight against Soviet forces. bin Laden's wealth, combined with his reputation for piety and courage in battle, elevated his status as a militant leader. By 1984, bin Laden and Azzam founded Maktab al-Khidamat, an organization that funneled money, weapons, and fighters from across the Arab world into Afghanistan. Through Maktab al-Khidamat, bin Laden utilized his inherited family wealth to cover expenses such as airfare, accommodations, and necessary paperwork with Pakistani authorities, along with providing other logistical support for the jihadist fighters. He set up training camps in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Pakistan, where he trained volunteers from around the Muslim world to combat the Soviet-backed Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. Between 1986 and 1987, bin Laden established a base in eastern Afghanistan for several dozen of his Arab soldiers. From this location, he engaged in combat activities against Soviet forces, including participation in the Battle of Jaji in 1987. Although the battle had little strategic importance, it was celebrated in the mainstream Arab media, leading to bin Laden becoming idolized by many Arabs during this time. By 1988, bin Laden had parted ways with Maktab al-Khidamat. While Azzam focused on supporting Afghan fighters, bin Laden sought a more direct military involvement. A key factor in their split, and the subsequent formation of al-Qaeda, was Azzam's insistence on integrating Arab fighters into existing Afghan groups, rather than establishing a separate fighting force. Al-Qaeda is believed to have been founded in August 1988 during a meeting between bin Laden, several senior leaders of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and Abdullah Azzam. The group was characterized as an organized Islamic faction aimed at elevating the Word of God and ensuring the triumph of his religion. He quickly became viewed by the government as a radical and a potential threat. In 1990, the government rejected his request to use his network of fighters to protect Saudi Arabia from the invasion threat posed by Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Bin Laden was furious when Saudi Arabia chose to rely on U.S. troops for defense during the Persian Gulf War, causing a widening divide between him and the country's leaders. In 1991, he was expelled from Saudi Arabia and moved to Sudan by the end of the year. He viewed the Saudi government's reliance on foreign, non-Muslim powers as not only an insult to Islam, but also a grave act of submission to the West. Bin Laden saw the U.S. as a dominant force working against the interests of Muslims globally, and this reliance on American military support fed his growing animosity toward both the U.S. and the Saudi monarchy. His sense of betrayal fueled his desire to take direct action against what he saw as Western encroachment and domination of the Muslim world. Bin Laden's outrage over the U.S. military presence in Saudi Arabia soon translated into violent action. His first significant attack was the 1992 Aden hotel bombings in Yemen. On December 29, 1992, 2 bombs exploded at hotels in Aden, where U.S. military personnel were staying, en route to Somalia to participate in a U.S.-led humanitarian mission known as Operation Restore Hope. This mission was aimed at stabilizing Somalia amid its civil war and famine, but bin Laden saw it as further U.S. intervention in Muslim lands. Although no Americans were killed in the attack, it did claim the lives of 2 Austrian tourists, serving as an early warning of bin Laden's intensifying violence directed at the U.S. At the time, the bombings did not give the United States cause for concern because no Americans had died. Bin Laden's next significant escalation of violence towards the U.S. was the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. On February 26, 1993, a group of terrorists, led by Ramzi Youssef, detonated a truck bomb in the underground garage of the World Trade Center in New York City. The goal of the bombing was to cause the North Tower to collapse onto the South Tower, resulting in the destruction of both skyscrapers and potentially killing tens of thousands, while also creating a massive economic disruption. Although this objective was not achieved, the attack did claim the lives of 6 individuals, including a pregnant woman, and resulted in over 1,000 injuries. The incident also acted as a warning for future attacks and highlighted al-Qaeda's capability to execute coordinated operations within the U.S. Although bin Laden was not directly involved in the planning or execution of the bombing, He was later linked to the attack through his support for the broader jihadist network that included Yusuf and others. The 1998 United States Embassy bombings were among the most devastating attacks carried out under the direction of Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. On August 7, 1998, simultaneous truck bomb explosions targeted the U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The attacks were timed to coincide with the 8th anniversary of the arrival of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War. In Nairobi, a truck filled with explosives was detonated outside the embassy, causing a massive blast that killed 213 people, including 12 Americans, and injured over 4,000 others. Most of the casualties were local civilians who were caught in the explosion's devastating impact. In Dar es Salaam, a similar truck bomb went off at the U.S. Embassy, killing 11 people and wounding 85. Bin Laden and al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for the attacks, which were carried out by operatives trained and supported by the terrorist network. Bin Laden, who had been operating from Afghanistan, was officially charged by the United States in connection with the attacks, and a $5 million reward was offered for his capture. The bombings led to international condemnation and prompted Operation Infinite Reach, a U.S. military response in which Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched against suspected al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan and a pharmaceutical factory in Sudan believed to be producing chemical weapons for the group. On October 12, 2000, the USS Cole Navy destroyer was docked in Aden for refueling. As the ship rested in the harbor, 2 suicide bombers posing as crew members of a small boat approached the side of the destroyer. Once alongside the ship, they detonated a powerful explosive device hidden aboard the boat. The explosion ripped a 40 by 60 foot hole in the port side of the destroyer, instantly killing 17 U.S. sailors and injuring 39 others. The bomb's force caused widespread damage, flooding parts of the ship, and triggering a frantic effort by the remaining crew to save their fellow sailors and prevent the vessel from sinking. The damage to the USS Cole was extensive, but the crew's rapid response and emergency procedures ultimately kept the ship afloat. While bin Laden wasn't directly involved in carrying out the attack, al-Qaeda handled its planning and financing, making it one of their most successful operations before September 11th. For bin Laden, the bombing wasn't just a strike on a U.S. warship, it was a symbolic attack against what he saw as American imperialism in Muslim lands. Despite the attack's severity, the U.S. response was relatively muted, with no immediate military retaliation, allowing bin Laden and his operatives to remain operating freely. On August 6, 2001, 36 days before the 9/11 attacks, the CIA delivered a briefing titled "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." to then-President George W. Bush. This document warned of the growing terrorism threat posed by bin Laden and al-Qaeda, highlighting, quote, patterns of suspicious activity in this country consistent with preparations for a hijacking of U.S. aircraft. Senior officials, including Vice President Dick Cheney and staff from Donald Rumsfeld's office at the Department of Defense, speculated whether these reports could be a deception by al-Qaeda, intentionally crafted to waste resources in response. Despite this warning, officials did not take significant action to address the warnings provided. The 9/11 attacks were a series of coordinated terrorist attacks carried out by al-Qaeda in 2001 under the leadership of Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda operatives hijacked 4 commercial airplanes and used them as weapons against key targets in the United States. American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175 were flown into the north and south towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, causing the buildings to collapse and killing thousands. Flight 77 was crashed into the Pentagon, the heart of U.S. military operations. The 4th plane, United Airlines Flight 93, was headed for a high-profile target, likely the White House or the Capitol, but crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after brave passengers fought back against the hijackers. The attacks claimed nearly 3,000 lives, with approximately 6,000 to 25,000 people injured, and many of the survivors facing long-term health issues. On the day of the attacks, communications intercepted by the National Security Agency and intelligence reports from German agencies quickly linked the operation to bin Laden. Initially, Osama bin Laden denied any involvement in the attacks, claiming he had no prior knowledge of the operation. However, a videotape recovered by U.S. forces later revealed him discussing the attacks in a manner that suggested he had foreknowledge of the plot. As time went on, bin Laden abandoned his denials and claimed he personally directed the 19 hijackers. He also accused President George W. Bush of negligence regarding the hijacking of the planes, suggesting that the U.S. government had failed to take adequate precautions against such threats. Bin Laden further stated that his inspiration to destroy the World Trade Center stemmed from witnessing the destruction of towers in Lebanon by Israeli forces during the 1982 Lebanon War. Following the attacks, the War on Terror was initiated in October 2001 with the goal of dismantling al-Qaeda's network and preventing future terrorist threats. Osama bin Laden became known as the face of terrorism for the United States, prompting officials to identify him and the al-Qaeda organization as the main suspects. The U.S. government offered a reward of $25 million for any information that would lead to his capture or death. The manhunt for Osama bin Laden was a complex and prolonged operation that spanned nearly a decade. 8 days after the United States bombing Afghanistan in retaliation, the Taliban, who had been harboring bin Laden and al-Qaeda, proposed to turn him over to a third-party country for trial in exchange for the U.S. to end the bombing. George Bush quickly rejected the offer, stating that the situation was no longer negotiable. In the early years of the manhunt, U.S. forces focused on Afghanistan, employing a combination of ground troops, airstrikes, and intelligence operations to locate bin Laden. He was elusive, often moving from one location to another, utilizing a network of supporters and the rugged terrain of the Tora Bora region to evade capture. In late 2001, U.S. Special Forces and CIA operatives conducted a series of assaults on the Tora Bora cave complex, where bin Laden was thought to be hiding. However, he managed to escape, reportedly crossing into Pakistan. As the years passed, the focus of the manhunt shifted between various regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan, particularly the federally administered tribal areas. The U.S. utilized advanced technology, including drone surveillance and intelligence gathering operations, to track bin Laden's movements. Intelligence reports indicated that he was likely using couriers to communicate and move around, further complicating efforts to locate him. Al-Qaeda continued to release time-sensitive and professionally verified videos demonstrating bin Laden's continued survival, including a video in which he taunted the U.S. and called for more attacks. After years with no significant leads, the manhunt took a turn in 2010 when U.S. intelligence officials intercepted communications from one of bin Laden's couriers, which eventually led them to a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, where he was believed to be living. The compound's unusual security measures, including high walls topped with barbed wire and a lack of telephone or internet connectivity, raised significant suspicions among U.S. intelligence operatives. It was clear that whoever was living there was taking extraordinary precautions to avoid detection. By April 2011, after several months of careful surveillance and intelligence gathering, President Barack Obama made the decision to authorize a Navy SEAL operation aimed at capturing or eliminating bin Laden. This authorization came after extensive discussions among national security advisors, reflecting the high stakes and intense scrutiny surrounding the operation. On May 2, 2011, the operation to capture or kill Osama bin Laden commenced just after midnight local time in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Navy SEAL Team 6 was tasked with the mission. The team flew from a base in Afghanistan to Pakistan in 2 modified Black Hawk helicopters, which were equipped with stealth technology to minimize radar detection. As the helicopters approached the compound, one of the aircraft encountered mechanical issues and had to perform an emergency landing about 100 yards from the target. The SEALs quickly secured the area, and the second helicopter continued to the compound and successfully landed. Upon entering the compound, the SEALs encountered a heavily fortified structure. They quickly moved through the first floor, where they found and killed several armed guards. The SEALs methodically ascended to the upper levels of the compound, clearing each room as they went. As the SEALs reached the top floor, they found bin Laden in a small room. According to reports, he was unarmed, but did not immediately surrender. Bin Laden was shot twice, once in the chest and once in the head. After bin Laden was shot, the SEALs confirmed his identity. They took photographs of his body as evidence and collected intelligence materials from the compound, including computers and documents. The entire operation lasted approximately 40 minutes. After securing the compound and ensuring there were no further threats, the SEALs transported bin Laden's body to their helicopter. The team made their way back to their base in Afghanistan, where bin Laden's identity was confirmed through DNA testing. Following the successful completion of the mission, bin Laden's body was buried at sea to prevent any potential burial site from becoming a shrine for his followers. The media extensively reported that Robert J. O'Neill was the one who fatally shot bin Laden. However, this account has been largely disputed by witnesses, who suggest that bin Laden may have already been dead when O'Neill arrived on the scene, having been injured by an unnamed member of SEAL Team 6, known only by the pseudonym Red. Bin Laden's death was seen as a big win in the war on terror and strengthened global counterterrorism efforts. It showed how effective intelligence sharing and military operations could be, especially between the U.S. and Pakistan. In the following years, these efforts ramped up, focusing on breaking down terrorist networks and stopping the rise of new extremist groups. However, the ongoing threat from jihadist factions led to a shift in strategy, with more focus on addressing the deeper social and political issues that contribute to terrorism. Bin Laden's death dealt a major blow to al-Qaeda, both symbolically and operationally. As the group's founder and key figure in the jihadist movement, his loss left a leadership gap that was hard to fill. Ayman al-Zawahiri, his deputy, took over, but analysts pointed out that al-Qaeda struggled to maintain the same influence and coordination among its affiliates. The group was already fracturing, and bin Laden's death sped up this decline, with different factions acting more independently, eventually leading to the rise of splinter groups like ISIS. In the United States, bin Laden's death elicited a complex response. Initially, there was a surge of national pride and relief as crowds gathered outside the White House and in Times Square to celebrate the news. It symbolized a sense of closure for many who had been affected by the 9/11 attacks. However, it also sparked debates about the U.S. role in the Middle East, the ongoing military presence in Afghanistan, and the broader implications for national security. The death of bin Laden did not eliminate the threat of terrorism. Rather, it highlighted the ongoing challenges the U.S. faced in ensuring homeland security and managing its foreign policy.